Speaking before the United Nations General Assembly this Friday, the President of Palestine denounced the hardships suffered under the Israeli occupation. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has authorized the construction of over 5,000 illegal settlements in occupied Palestinian territories. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. Venezuelan Vice President for Communications Jorge Rodriguez rejected statements by the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, who presented an oral update on the situation of human rights in Venezuela this Friday. The Venezuelan official stressed that the High Commissioner's expression of concerns regarding the electoral process represented an attack on the right of the Venezuelan people to hold free elections without foreign interference. Rodriguez pointed out that over 14,000 candidates have been registered to contest the December 6 parliamentary elections, of which more than 13,000 represent Venezuelan opposition parties. He added that the High Commissioner's statements were aligned with the interventionist plans against Venezuela supported by the United States government. And on presenting the oral update on Venezuela's human rights situation covering the period from July 2nd until September 25th, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, accused the Venezuelan government of repression of peaceful protests by police forces. Bachelet claimed that her office had recorded 711 deaths of young people in disadvantaged neighborhoods as a result of security operations between June and August this year. Likewise, the High Commissioner welcomed the arrest of 5 members of the Special Action Forces, allegedly responsible for the death of 2 people in Zulia on August 21st. She also called for the lifting of the economic sanctions imposed by the United States, while noting that they hinder the distribution of humanitarian aid and essential goods. The Council of Popular and Indigenous Organizations of Honduras has called for an end to delaying strategies to prevent the prosecution of the man accused of masterminding the murder of environmental activist Berta Cáceres. The Council announced on social media that the delay tactics employed by the defense team of David Castillo, the mastermind behind the killing, are a strategy to provide impunity to those guilty of her murder. Prosecutors are demanding that the accused be tried, given the strong evidence against him of having planned the murder of Berta Cáceres, ordered by the TeleSUR family. Cáceres, who was murdered on March 3, 2016, was the promoter of popular resistance against the Aguasarca hydroelectric project to be developed on the Gualcarique River. In Chile, television coverage of the campaign for the referendum on a new constitution has kicked off. This Friday, social organizations and political parties will participate in television spaces dedicated to discussing the referendum with the objective of outlining the arguments of the for. The United States government recently announced new sanctions aimed at tightening the economic, commercial and financial blockade against Cuba, despite the international rejection of this unilateral policy. The new regulations came into force on Thursday. Our correspondent in Havana, Nayara Tardo, brings us the details.
Cubans woke up on Thursday with new sanctions against their country. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, ordered to sanction the American tourists who visit the Caribbean island and stay in all kinds of government properties.
The problem is that we have been under siege our whole lives, and always as history tells, they will continue to impose those measures because historically Cuba sets them.
Analysts warn that Trump insists on putting more pressure on the Cuban economy in an attempt to divert attention from the situation in his own country, which has become the epicenter of COVID-19 pandemic, registering over 53,000 positive cases per day.
Announcing that the Treasury Department will prohibit U.S. travelers from staying at properties owned by the Cuban government. We're also further restricting the importation of Cuban alcohol and Cuban tobacco. These actions will ensure that U.S. dollars do not fund the Cuban regime and go directly to the Cuban people. Big difference, really.
The U.S. president's announcement came just one day after Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel denounced the consequences of the economic blockade against Cuba before the United Nations General Assembly.
The aggressiveness of the blockade has escalated to a qualitatively new level, which reinforces its condition as a real and determining impediment to the management of the economy and development of our country.
However, experts confirm that it is not coincidental that these measures were announced when there are only 40 days left for the elections in the United States.
First of all, we need to put in context that they are the gates of an election, and Florida is one of the most important states for Donald Trump, the Florida electorate, and also winning that territory. That is, we're talking about the Cuban Americans, who are mostly people who, deep down, agree with these aggressive U.S. policies towards Cuba.
This measure also restricts the importation of rum and tobacco from the Caribbean country by U.S. visitors.
And that's not all, but they also restrict people-to-people exchange, tourism trips, cultural exchanges, because the idea is basically to suffocate. They have developed throughout history some sort of manual that is all well described in a book that is called The Art of Pain, which reflects that the aggression policies of the United States are all about. They are basically looking
Pressure on Cuba. Donald Trump has imposed almost a daily sanction on the Cuban government, as well as on foreign institutions or companies that do business with the country. Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez Parrilla declared on Thursday that Trump not only violates the rights of the people, but also the rights of the American citizens.
Welcome back to From the South. This Friday, speaking at the 10th plenary meeting of the 75th UN General Assembly, the President of the State of Palestine, Mahmoud Abbas, denounced the hardships that the Palestinian people have suffered under the Israeli regime, while noting Palestinians would stand up against the occupation.
What more could I say about the suffering of my people? The misery they experience every day while the world stands by watching, and their long overdue legitimate aspirations to live in freedom, independence, and dignity, just like the rest of the world. How long do we have to wait until there is a just solution to the Palestinian question, a solution guaranteed by international law? How long will the Palestinian people continue to languish under the yoke of Israeli occupation? How long do we have to wait until there is a just solution to the status of millions of Palestinian refugees, in line with the relevant UN resolutions adopted 70 years ago?
And the Palestinian president also denounced Israel's plans to annex 33% of Palestinian territories and East Jerusalem, as well as the regime's numerous crimes against the Palestinian people.
How long do we have to wait until there is a just solution to the Palestinian question, a solution guaranteed by international law? How long will the Palestinian people continue to languish under the yoke of Israeli occupation? How long do we have to wait until there is a just solution to the status of millions of Palestinian refugees, in line with the relevant UN resolutions adopted 70 years ago? And they will stand up to occupation, aggression, and betrayal until they gain their rights, in spite of the difficulties and in spite of the unjust blockade that aims to undermine them. We will not bow down. We will not surrender. We will not compromise. And we shall triumph.
And also addressing the 10th plenary meeting of the UN General Assembly this Friday, Pope Francis said that the current health crisis calls on us to choose what really matters and opens two paths forward for humanity.
The pandemic indeed calls upon us to take this testing time as a time for choosing, the time to choose between what really counts, what really matters, and what doesn't matter so much, to separate what is necessary from what is unnecessary. We are therefore facing the choice between two different paths. One leads to enhancing multilateralism, the expression of renewed global shared responsibility and solidarity based on justice and achieving peace and unity for the human family, which is God's project for the world. The other option gives priority to self-sufficiency, to nationalism, protectionism, individualism, and isolation. This option excludes the poorest, the most vulnerable.
The World Health Organization is recommending that health workers and older adults are prioritized in influenza vaccination programs during the COVID-19 pandemic amid an increase in demand for the seasonal shot.
Each year, as a reminder, seasonal influenza affects individuals in every country and results up to 1 billion cases, 3 to 5 million severe cases, and on average 290,000 to 650,000 deaths, respiratory-related deaths annually. This year, however, the Strategic Advisory Group of Experts on Immunization have endorsed a set of interim recommendations for influenza vaccination during COVID-19. Based on a set of considerations, including alleviating additive burden on healthcare systems and vulnerable populations, and managing potentially limited supplies of influenza vaccines. SAGE has recommended and endorsed in the last week, among the 5 risk groups, health workers and older adults are the highest priority groups for influenza vaccination during COVID-19 pandemic.
On Friday, Spain's health minister noted that the central government has urged the Madrid region to impose lockdown restrictions across the entire capital as authorities race to slow the spread of the virus in the country's worst-hit region.
The first recommendation made by the Spanish government is that all the measures that have been applied to 6 districts of the city in certain health areas of 6 districts of the city be applied to the whole of the city of Madrid and to all the cities that have cumulative incidence in the last 14 days of 500 cases per 100,000 inhabitants, which is double the average that we have in Spain. The second recommendation we have made is that the permit for the movement of people within these containment areas should be maintained, but that the order should also contain an explicit recommendation to avoid unnecessary movement both within these areas and throughout the territory of the autonomous community.
The Paris Public Prosecutor's Office has opened an investigation into attempted murder related to terrorism after the stabbing attack that left 2 people injured near the former premises of the satirical weekly magazine Charlie Hebdo.
We have decided to launch an investigation into terrorism-related attempted murder, as well as terrorist criminal association of a criminal nature. With regard to the investigation itself, the main perpetrator has been arrested, is currently in police custody, and a second individual is also in police custody, in order to carry out a number of checks as regards his relations with the main perpetrator I have just mentioned.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has authorized the construction of over 5,000 illegal settlements in occupied Palestinian territories. Netanyahu called for an urgent meeting of the Supreme Urban Planning Council to approve the construction of the illegal housing in the occupied West Bank. The Israeli regime had frozen such construction for more than 6 months as the US worked to broker deals to normalize ties with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. While Emirati officials described the normalization deal with the Tel Aviv regime as a successful means to stave off annexation and save the two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Israeli Prime Minister has underlined that annexation is not off the table, but has simply been delayed. Vowing to hand over power within 18 months and honour international accords, the interim president and vice president of Mali's transitional government were sworn in this Friday in the capital, Bamako.
In the name of the truth of the ballot box, which must be the only norm in a democracy, I will fight uncompromisingly against votes which come at a great cost. Dear countrymen, the transition that is beginning will not call into question any of Mali's international commitments, nor the agreements signed by the government.
Meanwhile, the Economic Community of West African States has confirmed that the sanctions on
Prime Minister is appointed, sanctions would be lifted.
Guinea-Bissau celebrated 47 years of independence from Portugal with a military parade and a speech by the president this Friday, who noted that the festivities were taking place in a unique context due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
The commemoration of the 47th anniversary of our national independence takes place in a unique and defiant context of our life. Hence, the risk of contamination of the new coronavirus requires us to adopt urgent, harmonized and favorable measures which can strengthen our conscious response capacity to the COVID-19 pandemic. I count on each of you without excluding anyone and without distinction of origin, gender, ethnicity, religious belief or parentage, because we are a concrete generation. We are all brothers.
India continues to confirm new COVID-19 infections, having already reported over 5.9 million cases. The ongoing pandemic has led to over 93,000 deaths in the huge country. However, over 4.8 million patients have recovered from the virus, with the recovery rate increasing to 81%, according to statistics from the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. According to the Indian Council of Medical Research, the country has conducted more than 67 million lab tests to detect the presence of the novel coronavirus. The leader of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Kim Jong-un, issued an apology on Friday over what he described as the unexpected and disgraceful killing of a South Korean at sea. The apology was made public by the South Korean Presidential Office. The message comes as inter-Korean tensions have grown and during a standoff in nuclear negotiations between Pyongyang and Washington. Analysts said the North was looking to placate its neighbour after the shooting, the first time its forces have killed a southern citizen in a decade, which provoked outrage in the South. The fisheries official was shot dead on Tuesday by North Korean soldiers. According to an investigation by North Korea, more than 10 shots were fired at the man after warning shots were fired following his entry into North Korean waters and failure to reveal his identity. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has denounced as pure slander U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's accusations against Chinese diplomatic and consular institutions and their personnel in the United States.
The Chinese Consulate General in the United States, including the Consul General in New York, and its personnel have always abided by the provisions of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, and the Sino-U.S. Consular Regulations. Their contacts with all walks of life in the United States are normal and above board, and there is nothing to blame. In contrast, some of the U.S. consular agencies and personnel are full of misdeeds. We advise the U.S. side to stop slandering China's diplomatic and consular missions and their personnel in the United States immediately.
This news brief, but remember you can find these and many of our stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss and thank you for watching.